Welcome to lecture 34, Searching an Array Using Loops. So this lecture is all about how we can actually look into an array and say, do you contain this? Do you contain that? If you do contain this, then do that. And all of these different things. So we're going to look at a couple of examples inside of this lecture of making a little bit of a practical application using searching through an array. So to start off, we're going to create a simple array. We're going to stick with this kind of student-teacher kind of setup that we have going on. And we're going to start by simply creating a string array. So we're going to say string and then the array symbol and then the name of it. So I'm going to say students equals new string array. And I'm going to say that we have, let's say, 4 students for now. We have 4 students in our class. So this string array is basically going to represent all our students' names, their first name only in the class. Actually, we can use the shorthand. We'll use this version in an exercise. And maybe I'll do it also like this maybe at the end of this lecture. However, so let's add my students. Let's say I have Bob, comma, Ted, Tom, and Fred. So the reason why I'm putting those double quotes is because each element of this array is a string. And strings require double quotes. So Bob, Ted, Tom, Fred. Bob is student sub 0. Ted is students sub 1. Tom is students sub 2. And Fred is students sub 3. So then we have our 3 students. And what our program wants to do is ask the user to enter in a name, a lookup. And basically, eventually, it's going to look up their grade. It's going to say, okay, what's Bob's grade? Then we type in his name, and it will tell me his grade. But for now, we'll just see if he's even in my class or not. So we'll ask the user, okay, enter student name to search. Enter student's name to search for. String student's name equals console.readline. I'm not parsing it because I want a string. So that works fine. So I have their student's name now stored into this string variable. Now, this comes the hard part. How do I actually figure out if it contains this name? So logically, let's go to some logic here. How would you figure out if whatever they typed in exists in this array? The only thing that you could do is say, okay, is the first integer, or is the first string whatever they typed in? Let's say I typed in Sam as a test. I typed in Sam. Is the first slot Sam? No, it's not. It's Bob. Okay, let's go to the next one. Is the second slot Sam? No, it's Ted. Let's go to the next one. Is the third slot Sam? No, it's not. It's Tom. Let's go to the next one. And is the last slot Sam? No, it's Fred. So what does that mean? Okay, that means that this user does not exist in this array. So what I had to do is I had to check every single one. I had to check every single string inside the array to see if it was whatever was typed in. So that should hint to you, if I'm checking every single one, what do I need to do? I need to use a loop. So I'm going to use a loop that basically starts off by just going through the array. So I'm going to say for int I equals 0, as long as I is less than students dot length. I'm using that so that as my array grows, my loop automatically adjusts. So as long as I is less than students dot length, I plus plus. So that's the basic loop setup. So I have my loop. Now I need to actually search it, every single one, and see if it actually contains it inside the array. So I'm going to create some kind of bool that keeps track of if it contains it or not. I'm going to explain this a little bit more in detail in a second. I'm going to say contains. Now I'll set it equal to false for now, saying that we don't know if it's inside the array yet. I'm going to do an if statement inside the loop saying if student's name, which is whatever is typed in, equals students sub I. So this is saying whatever is typed in, if it equals to whatever current slot we're on. So if this is the first iteration of the loop, I is 0, that would be if student's name equals Bob. If that's true, then I'm going to say contains equals true. I'm just going to mark this bool as true, and that's it. So that's all I need for the loop. It's going to go through. Once it finds, if it does make a match, it will say contains equals true. If it does not find a match, contains will just stay false. So once the loop's done, I'm going to say if contains equals true, then console.writeLine, the student is in the class, else console.writeLine, the student is not in the class. Very simple. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So enter the student's name to search for. Okay, let's look for Tom. Is Tom in my class? Tom, enter. The student is in the class. So Tom is in the class. Perfect. Let's try someone else. Let's try Sam. Sam, is Sam in my class this semester? No, Sam is not in the class. And basically, let's go over the logic again. It checks the entire array, searching it by every single slot. If that slot, whatever it is, Bob, Ted, Tom, or Fred, if that is equal to whatever I typed in, then let's make this bool variable true. Once it's done checking every single one, I'm going to go down here and say if contains equals true, then print out we found them, because that means we did find them. If it's false, that means we didn't find it, and it's just using that default value that we set. Now, you may be thinking, okay, why do we need this separate bool? Why don't we just say in here, found, and then we just say, oh, else, not found. Why don't we just do that? And a lot of people do actually say, why don't we do that? And the reason why we don't want to do that is because, yes, if I found them, it will say found. However, every single time you don't find them, it will say not found. And watch what happens. Let's go ahead and delete this code. Let's do it this way. Let's run it. Let's search for Fred, the last one. Fred, enter. Look what happens. Not found, not found, not found, found. You can clearly see it's checking every single name in the array, and it's saying not found for every single time. That's the reason why we can't put that inside of the for loop, because it's going to print every single time, because it's still doing its checking. That's why we just take a bool instead. We set a simple bool saying contains. If it does contain, we just set it to true, very easily. At the end, we'll just do an if statement. And the reason why we're doing it at the end is because we're not in the loop anymore. That means that if contains is false, it's only going to print it once because we're not in a loop. It's just going to print it once. So that's the reason why we want to do that. I just want to clear that up because a lot of people do get confused with that. Also, there's another thing that we can do to make this slightly more efficient. If we think about it, let's say I typed in Bob the first time. The for loop starts, I is 0. It says if Bob equals Bob, because student sub 0 is Bob. Contains equals true. So, okay, we found him. However, it's going to continue on, and now it's going to say students sub 1. So it will say, does Bob equal Ted? No. Then it will go on. Bob equals Tom. It will keep on checking this for all the elements in the array, even though I know I already found it. I know I found it because contains is true. But why is it continuing on? It's because it's continuing on because I programmed it to. My loop is programmed to check every single slot no matter what. So, that is not efficient. Because if I find it on the first check, I'm wasting time checking all the other ones because I know it is already there. And you may think that's not, okay, who cares? Yeah, who does care when it's only 4 students? But let's say I'm checking the entire college, and maybe it's 5,000 students or 20,000 students. Now, even though I could have possibly found it on the first check, I'm still checking 19,000 more students for no reason whatsoever. It's completely wasteful. So I can make it a little bit more efficient. I can use this keyword called break, which we've seen with the switch statement, and it also works with loops. I can say break. And basically what will happen here is, if this is true, it will break out of the loop and stop the loop right there, and it will not continue on. Just to prove this to you, let's add a console.writeLine test right here. Without the break, if I type in Bob on the first time, it still says test, 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 4 tests, and then it says I found it, right? It says that because it's checking every single one, even though it found it on the first try. If I put in break now and run it again, watch what happens. This is a lot more efficient. Bob. Boom. It found Bob instantly, and it broke out right there, and it didn't say test at all. So it only checked once, and it found it on the first chance, and it left the loop right away to make it extremely efficient. It didn't have to go on and keep on checking for nonsense. And you can imagine, like I said, if I had 20,000 students, that would be a lot and a lot of checking. So let's go ahead and remove that. So this is the most efficient way right now. So far, this is a pretty cool program. We're making some progress. We can search for a student and find if he exists in my class or not. But we need to get a little bit more into this before our exercise, because our exercise will be something involving this. So the last thing I want to talk about in this lecture is this new concept called a parallel array. Now, don't get all scared, parallel array. It's okay. A parallel array is a very simple concept. It just means it's another array with the same length. That's all it is. Another array with the same length. It could be a different type of data. It's just an array with the same length. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, in this situation, I have a string array. And an array can only hold one piece of, or one type of data, which is strings in this case. But I will also want to store the students' grades. So I have their names, but I also want to store their grades. So I want to say Bob has a 50, Ted has a 60, Tom has a 100, and Fred has an 88, whatever their grades is. How do I do that? So I need a parallel array, which is just an array with the same exact length. So int grades equals, I'm going to say Bob has a 77, Ted has a 50, Tom has a 78, and Fred has a 99. Notice how they have the same length. So students sub 0 is Bob, grades sub 0 is 77. Students sub 1 is Ted, grades sub 1 is 50. And do you see, that's how they're linked together. So 0, the index 0 in either array is Bob's name or his grade. So 0 will always be something with Bob. 1 will always be something with Ted. 2 will always be something with Tom. Now, if you're kind of thinking outside the box, you can see how you can actually use this. So once we actually find the student, we can actually take whatever index we're currently at. So let's say we typed in Bob, and we found Bob on the first time. That means that Bob is 0 right now. We found 0. So we can just take that 0 and then plug it into the grades array and actually find his grade, whatever it is. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make our program. You can enter in the student's name, and then it will return whatever the student's grade is in the class. And if they don't exist in the class, it will just say that they don't exist. So we have to slightly modify this. So what do? To stick with using this bool variable of contains, I'm just going to create another integer. I'm going to say int student grade. So this is going to be whatever the student's grade is if we end up finding it. If not, then I'm going to say that the student's not in the class. So how do we do this? When we're inside this loop, if this is true, so if student's name equals student sub I, that I means that that's that position in the array. So if I typed in Ted, I would be 1 because Ted is this, 0, 1. So I would have that 1 right now. So I could take that 1, which is just I. It's just the 1 is represented with an I. I would take that I and just plug it into grades to get the grades. So this is how it would look like. Contains equals true. Student grade equals to whatever the grade is at that position. So I'm going to say grades sub I. So I found the user at this position of I. So I'm going to take that I position and just connect it into the grades, and that will link me to his grade in that position. And that's Bob's grade in that position. So now student grade is equal to whatever this grade is. So in the true section down here, I can simply say, console.writeLine, the student's grade is placeholder, and plug in student grade. So I'm going to go over this one more time. Let me just, what are we getting an error? Oh, I need to give it an initial value. Let's set it equal to 0. Okay, the reason I was complaining is because it could potentially not have any value. So I just want to give it a default value of 0, even though we know logically if it ever reaches this code, it will have some kind of value no matter what. Let's go ahead and run this. Enter student's name to search for. Let's search for Fred. Now we know logically Fred has a 99 because I can see it, but the computer is dumb. So let's see if it could figure it out. I type in Fred, enter. The student is in the class, and his grade is 99. Look at that. It looked up his name and pulled his grade from the information. Let's try one more time. Let's try another one. Let's try Ted. Ted has a 50. The student is in the class, and the grade is 50. And let's try one more time without, with a name that's not in the array, like Sam. And the student is not in the class, so I don't get his grade. He does not exist. So let me go over the logic one more time in this. The loop. I create an empty variable that's going to hold the student's grade. I check every single slot to whatever the user types in. So if they type in Ted, it's going to say, okay, for int I equals 0, does Ted equal student sub 0? Does Ted equal Bob? No, it doesn't. It goes around. I goes up by 1. We come back. Does Ted equals student sub 1? Okay, let me check. Does Ted equal Ted? Yes, it does. That's true. Okay, let's go into this code. Contains equals true. Student's grade equals grade sub 1. So it takes that 1 because I found Ted at 1. It takes that 1 and looks in the grades array and says, okay, what's Ted's grade? It should be located at the slot 1. Okay, it is. I got his grade. It may sort into this grade variable so that I can use it later. So now the student grade is stored into the student grade variable. Once I come down here, if contains is true, it will attach that grade to whatever it found in that empty slot. So that is parallel arrays. Parallel arrays are just two arrays basically with the same exact length. They're parallel. That's where the name comes from. And by doing that, you can store many pieces of data for one specific entity. So my student can have a name, an age, a grade, a street name, zip code, whatever. I can have all that information by using parallel arrays. However, there is one thing. After you learn about classes in the upcoming sections, once you learn about classes, you will almost never use parallel arrays. And the reason is because you're going to learn a way how we can basically combine the student's name and age into one slot of an array. So I can have just one slot hold many pieces of data. So that's what you're going to eventually learn how to do so that we don't need all these multiple arrays. We can store it all into one array some magical way, which you'll eventually learn. Don't worry. But for now, parallel arrays work just fine. So that's it for this lecture. The next lecture, we're going to look at some basic built-in functions that arrays have that we can use at our disposal. I think we're just going to go over some, 3 basic methods that are built into the array class, and we're going to look at how we can use them and when we should use them.